Welcome to Housebound. Let me try that again, because I was like right over top of the mic, and that's be a prime time to scare our audience right at the beginning.
Gross. Yuck. No.
All right.
Why did you just like vomit into my ears?
I loved how delayed that was, because it happened like so many seconds ago. Anyways.
For us, it was just happening.
Yeah.
It's the whole issue of space-time and how it affects others that are farther away from the occurrence. Speaking of which, Greg, talk to us about aliens.
Okay.
This is Housebound. I'm Chris.
I'm Holly.
I'm Ashlyn.
I'm Greg.
And you're invited.
Welcome to Housebound, a podcast we made because we needed company. In it, we talk about things that are on our mind, and today we are talking aliens. To start off with, what media have you guys consumed that centers around aliens? What types of media?
Books and television and movies and podcasts. I think that's all of them.
What are some examples of like some specific, what's your favorite kind? Whether it's a franchise or a specific type.
All of them? There was a really good podcast that I listened to called The End of the World with Josh Clark. And it was basically about like the idea that it's just not possible statistically that there aren't aliens in the world or in the universe, and that every race of alien, I guess, or even us, would have to go through a great filter, and that's possibly why we haven't heard from them before. But I also really enjoy like sci-fi, anything sci-fi or fantasy that has to do with aliens, but not scary ones. Prometheus was okay, but the rest of the Alien franchise is too scary. I don't need to watch those.
Too scary, too bloody.
Yeah.
Too fast.
Yeah.
What about you, Ashlyn? What kind of alien media have you consumed?
I don't think I consider myself a connoisseur of alien media. I do read fiction, but it's not a lot of sci-fi or fantasy. It's mostly thriller is what I read, if it's going to be fiction. But I did read Hank Green's First Contact books that he put out over the course of the last 2 or 3 years. But I think that's pretty much it for alien-centered media, other than like blockbusters or whatever.
I just finished the first one of his. Is there a second one?
Yes, there is. The first one ends at like the random point at an end of a chapter, and it's very unsatisfying. And then you need that second book.
Yes, it was very unsatisfying. Okay.
Yeah, I read the first one as soon as it came out, and then I had to wait a long time for the second one, and I didn't realize that there was going to be a sequel, so that was a letdown.
Yeah, I finished and I was like, oh, I guess it's one of those books where you just get to pick your ending.
Nope. The ending has already been decided for you. Just grab the second book.
All right.
Nice. What about you, Chris?
Yeah, I think I've done all of the above: audiobooks and books and movies, toys.
What kind of specific examples?
Well, Star Wars. I mean,
oh yeah,
that's
I didn't even think of Star Wars as alien.
Pretty blatantly alien all around. I mean, what we would consider alien, I guess, in the universe of Star Wars, aliens don't really mean much else. But if we're talking about like First Contact-esque aliens, then things like E.T. or
Arrival.
I was trying to think of the name of it.
That's a good one.
Or I don't know if this was maybe I can't say this was my first interaction with alien content, but Ender's Game and that whole series
Mm-hmm.
was something that I read in elementary school, or started reading in elementary school, and that's a lot more political, and aliens are just kind of a thing. I assume it's some kind of meta conversation on humanity, like most, but that really introduced me to kind of the grown-up world of aliens. Everything wasn't so Toy Story-esque with little green three-eyed beings clamoring for a leader,
Yeah.
and more of a complex life form that may or may not have your interest in mind when it first makes its appearance in your society. So I think that kind of started me down a path of yearning for content that was a little bit, well, obviously a little bit more mature as I was getting older, but it was a little bit more compelling. And so that's what makes a movie like Arrival much more appreciative.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys know the book that has the main character? Her name is Meg. And
Yeah, Wrinkle in Time.
Yes, that one. As you were saying, like the first thing that you consumed that had aliens in it, I think mine was probably A Wrinkle in Time. And I was quite young. But it introduced the concept of them not needing to be humanoid, because they come across a bunch of creatures or aliens that are intelligent but don't necessarily have all five senses, or don't necessarily have 2 legs and 2 arms, like that kind of thing. And just like the idea that an alien race may not look like humanoid, but they could still be intelligent and get things done. Like it was a pretty interesting concept to have in a children's book. I thought anyway.
Yeah, that whole series is really interesting. There's a lot of weird cerebral stuff that she kind of brings in. So yeah, no, that's a good example.
I do appreciate the creators or writers of whatever the content is that go to lengths to make the aliens that they depict not your typical alien that you would assume to run across. Like, I don't even know if by this point by 2021, if there is like a standard alien that you can draw. I'm sure most kids would still draw like a 2-armed, 2-legged little short green guy, circa Roswell. But
yeah,
I don't necessarily always agree with the reality of how an alien could exist like this, but I'm much more interested in the abstract and the ones that are hard to wrap your brain around, like are they called cephalopods in Arrival? Is that what they call them?
Yeah.
That sounds pretty familiar.
Yeah.
Or the whatever they decide to call them in Live, Die, Repeat, or Never Say Die, or Edge of Tomorrow, depending on when you watch the movie.
That movie has too many titles.
Or the one with Natalie Portman and
Star Wars.
Oscar Isaac.
Still Star Wars.
It could still be Star Wars, but they're not in the same movie. It's the one with Natalie Portman's character who has a team that goes into this area where an alien
Annihilation.
has...
Yes.
Annihilation. There we go. Yeah. And again, it was like a trippy movie, and lots of people love it or hate it. But I like just the discussion that like the alien, and I think Star Trek always tried to do this, where they were like, the alien is now just a giant unseeable mist or something like that. And it's made up of a million little creatures instead of being one singular organism. And just trying to like mess with you and get you to see it in a different light. So I like content where it's like that, because then it makes me think. And like I said, I like things that have a little bit more depth to them. So
yeah, when I heard that Annihilation was supposedly a pretty good movie, I noticed that it was based on a book by Jeff Vanderstelt. And so I got the book. Oh boy, is the movie better.
Oh, really?
What a trip of a book.
You don't hear that very often.
No, the book is constantly like It'll try to describe something creepy that's going on, and it'll describe some like monster or whatever. It's like the monster appeared out of the waters. It was rising, and its shape was horrifying. It's too difficult to even explain, and so it just won't explain it. It won't describe it. That's all you get. It was horrendous, and it was too difficult to describe. Point blank. Like, what?
That's
what
too
sort
bad.
of descriptive writing is that? Ugh. I can't recommend the book, and it's like a 3-part series or something like that. I finished reading the first book, and I was like, golly. And then I looked online, and the most accurate review I ever saw of that said this. This book was like someone trying to explain to you the dream they had. Where nothing connects and plot points jump all the time and there's no real firm description of what your surroundings are. That's exactly what
That's
that book
so
was.
funny.
that Jeff guy must have read Stephen King's Under the Dome and just went, hey, that's too much explanation.
Yep.
I'm gonna swing the other side.
The book series has like a cult following, but it must be a very niche group of people that appreciate that.
Yep.
The ones that like to hear about how your dream was going.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I know as a kid, we watched a movie called My Favorite Martian, which had the guy from Back to the Future. Yeah.
Yes.
Christopher Lloyd.
Yeah. There you go. So Christopher Lloyd, this Martian or whatever from outer space, pretending to be human, right? So and chaos ensues as he attempts to fit in. But yeah, so that one was kind of interesting. And then Star Wars for sure. Aliens, the more kind of horror side of it, and
Transformers.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned Arrival, Chris, because I when I was preparing to kind of head up this episode, that one I didn't think until like way after, because I think we don't normally tend to think of aliens as non-humanoid. We tend to think of humanoid aliens when we think of like media that we consume. Yeah, and so it's interesting when media breaks that kind of trope and does something different. So, but yeah. Another thing that's interesting is that there's definitely types of aliens beyond just humanoid and non-humanoid, because there's also the whole intelligent versus non-intelligent, right? I think we defaulted to the intelligent because that's probably more interesting storytelling.
Yeah.
But that whole side is also interesting. I feel like when it came to humanoid versus non-humanoid, Avatar kind of did like a merge where they sort of were like, we're going to take the humanoid alien, but we're still going to do like really different things with that alien that we haven't maybe seen before, like with the whole like merging with the beast and
consciousnesses.
Yeah. And because I remember watching that movie, and I still, even though it was humanoid aliens, I was like, wow, this is like so creative and so bright and colorful and very vivid. So, but yeah, I think at the end of the day, like our media tends to make aliens look like us, but you're right, Chris, in the sense that when they don't look at like us, that makes things a lot more interesting and maybe unpredictable. So,
like Pacific Rim.
Yeah.
Goodness, all these movies have aliens.
Yep.
I don't think of them as aliens at all.
I just had a movie hit my brain, like a weird flashback from like, this must have come out in like 2005. I want to know, was there aliens in this movie? The movie is
Lilo and Stitch.
No. Herbie Fully Loaded.
What?
I don't think there are aliens in that.
No.
Was that an
Herbie?
alien movie or no?
No, it's just a cursed car.
It's a car.
It's just a cursed car.
He's cursed.
Okay, it was just cursed.
Well, I don't know what it was.
For some reason, when you're talking about Transformers, like Herbie
Yes.
Fully Loaded, like unlocked the secret at this back of my brain. I was like, wow, that movie.
That was a thing.
It's possible that like there is a scene, I believe, in the second Transformers movie from like the 2000s era. I don't know, not so like the live action movies, not any of the cartoon ones, where, I mean, technically the Autobots and Decepticons are alien, and like I don't know if creatures is the right word, but they're technically aliens, I guess, because they're
technological
they're not from
life.
Earth. So
Mhm.
they are an alien thing, because alien is basically just another like word for an unknown thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
Extraterrestrial.
If the Transformers are extraterrestrials, is Herbie an extraterrestrial?
I don't
well, no,
know
what I was going to say
Herbie
was
is.
there is a scene in the second movie where Bumblebee constantly takes on the form of these like old yellow VWs, and so it's possible that you were like, oh, you had two Beetles in your mind, and you were like thinking about Transformers, even if you've never really seen it. You were just thinking about him like transforming into a Beetle, and then Herbie, I believe, is also a Beetle, and so
Herbie's a bug.
or a bug. Sorry, so possibly.
Interesting stuff. Interesting stuff.
Oh, man.
Media aside, one of the interesting things, like essentially the reason why I brought up this as a potential topic for a podcast is because aliens have been in the news recently, or at least the talk of them. I don't know if you guys have been hearing anything about this, but
Yes.
Just really briefly,
the
yeah.
U.S. Yeah, I'll give kind of a bit of a catch people up to speed. There was an article from Time Magazine that I was looking at that kind of referenced a bit of some stuff, because essentially what I'll read a section of it. So like in 2007, the U.S. Congress established the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program Task Force. I don't think that's an acronym that can be made into anything. So anyways.
I was really hoping that you would tell me the acronym.
No, it's just like a tip to... Yeah, there's nothing in there. So
All
anyways,
right, that's
sorry.
too bad.
They could have just reworked some of the letters, but they didn't. So it was championed by a Nevada senator, charging the Intelligence Department with determining if the objects really are extraterrestrial in origin, or perhaps worse, advanced military technology being developed by China, Russia, or other potential foes. So that program shut down for lack of funding in 2012. But the work resumed last year when then President Donald Trump signed a $2.3 trillion COVID-19 relief bill that also required the Pentagon to continue investigating UAPs, which I'm assuming unidentified. There's probably a technical term.
Aerospace
Projectiles?
Maybe. Instead of UFOs. And released its finding to the public. That release is tentatively set for later this month, but the New York Times, and this is where I'm going to have to correct this Times article because I don't think it's correct. But the New York Times published a copy yesterday. So rather than a copy, I don't think they had a copy, but they talked with people who had been briefed on this article, officials, and the conclusions are just enough to intrigue everyone and satisfy no one.
Of course.
Yeah. So there's no evidence that UAPs are of extraterrestrial origin, but nor can the possibility be ruled out.
Of course not, because how do you disprove something that you can't even prove?
Yeah.
Like, you can't...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
We can neither confirm nor deny the presence of a human child here.
Yeah, exactly.
But in terms of when the New York Times talked to these officials and kind of got some feedback about the report that they had been briefed on, essentially, like in the past 20 years, military pilots have made more than 120 sightings of objects with no apparent sign of conventional propulsion, so no exhaust or contrails, and certainly no wings or fans. Also, another quote here, the suddenness with which the objects change directions would, or at least should, cause G-forces that would rip them or their inhabitants apart, and the length of time some of them remain aloft goes beyond what conventional fuel technology could support. There's also been a video that's now been released that's pretty short. I think it's like a minute long, but it's kind of detailing some of these sightings from the Air Force's perspective. So, So anyways, needless to say, the full report will come out later this month, but apparently it's not going to be like anything too crazy beyond probably what's been released already from kind of these leaks. But so this is essentially... it's in the news now because now people are thinking, oh, okay, so it could also be foreign technology that's over the US. But I don't. I feel as though maybe U.S. citizens would much rather have aliens descend rather than a
Probably.
foreign party. So with aliens kind of being on the brain of the at least North American populace, what are maybe some of the implications of if aliens did exist? And now we're talking intelligent aliens, not non-intelligent, because chances that we find non-intelligent aliens are probably fairly high, like that there's some sort of creatures out there in the universe somewhere. But in terms of like intelligent life that we could actually like communicate with coherently, what would be some of the implications of them existing? So maybe we can like talk about political implications.
Well, if you believe in the Great Filter, then I don't know that we would find unintelligent extraterrestrial or alien or additional not from Earth as their origin beings, however you want to say it. But I'm not like a scientist, so I don't know so much about it that I can say for sure that that's cut and dry. It just would make sense that they couldn't achieve a point of sentience or intelligence in which they would be able to make themselves known to us. But that doesn't mean that we wouldn't necessarily be able to make ourselves known to them. Yeah. So I guess it's not impossible. But my gut reaction is that it would be like discovering a new species. And that might be an oversimplification, but constantly we're finding things that live so far down in the ocean that you never thought that there was things living down there, and you find it and people freak out about it because there's this thing that's 200 miles long that's been living in the ocean consuming who knows what for food and has managed to survive and gone unnoticed for millennia, and then we forget about it like a day later, like it hits the news, or it doesn't even hit real news. And so with anything relating to space, I feel like we're super excited when it comes to finding like dust and rocks that we can gather samples of, which is ice, not dust, I guess, ice and rocks, which we can mine samples from. And so that's really cool. That'll tell us a little bit about, the planet that we can't reach yet, ourselves. And so if we were to make, like, part of me thinks that if we were to find aliens, it would be like this new discovery. I don't know where it would go beyond that, but I feel like the initial response would be like the classification of this new thing as if it was suddenly expected to be part of the norm, whether we ever saw them again or not. I think they would immediately fall into a classification, so that if when you find new ocean life, you put it within its family, genus, species, whatever, you classify it. And then the other side of me thinks that if we were to make such a drastic jump from mining for minerals and cells of organisms that may or may not have ever existed on a different planet, to suddenly being confronted with full, self-functioning, capable of their own inhibitions life, I feel like people would lose their minds. Like, I feel like everything would just blow up, because it's like, what do we even know anymore? We think we know a lot, and we know that we know that there's a lot to know, but we also think that we have a pretty good grasp on things, and that we're basically we're basically the top of the food chain kind of situation. But then as soon as there's something else out there that we don't know about, we're suddenly trying to categorize ourselves. It's like, where do we fall into this food chain now?
Yeah, we might not be on top of the food chain anymore. Yep, that might wound our ego a bit.
As I said earlier, I just finished reading Hank Green's book, and that it basically takes this question into account. That's the whole book, where it's like, how does the world react when external life is found, and it doesn't really do anything to you one way or another, really. In his book, the extraterrestrial is like neutral. They just kind of stand around and observe. And the people are the ones that end up doing things to each other, which I think is pretty accurate. Like, I think he's got a pretty accurate idea of what we would do, because he's got two like large groups of people. And one is like, we should unify and figure out what we need to figure out in order to meet this challenge and rise to it. And then the other is about being terrified, basically. And like, we're going to meet it with fear, and we're going to meet it with judgment and fight against whatever is coming for us. And both, he really maps out both ideas about like how they could both seem reasonable or unreasonable. Does a really good job of that. It's a really good exploration of this topic, because like, especially with social media, because he very much gets into social media in that book, and how our fear or unification can spread considerably. So I think that it would be pretty similar to that. I think that the world would be divided pretty much right down the middle on how to deal with the issue.
Yeah, on one half people wanting to explore it, and then the other half people wanting to like arm themselves against it.
Yeah.
That's kind of similar to what The Expanse, the TV show, also kind of explores a little bit in terms of like people who are wanting to explore and discover and continue onward, and others who are a lot more like, no, we need to make this about war and about stakes and claim. And let me maybe round out the scenario a bit more focused in. So when it comes to aliens that are sentient, that we can somehow communicate with, that we've now made first contact with, what would be the things that, if we are trying to attempt a relationship of some sort with them, what would be some of the things that would have to change, or would, so whether it's like political, economic, social.
Well, right now, the aliens would have to make a specific relationship with each individual country, which I think would be a lot of work for them. So
I guess, would they though?
Yeah, because how are we going to decide who's going to represent us to the aliens?
Feel you'd almost need like a United Nations kind of panel.
Yeah, that doesn't even have every country in it.
Yeah, perhaps.
There's no way.
Well, I was thinking of that scenario and thinking like, would that be the first time humans have had to interact with something as a whole rather than like as individual countries, but now like as a unified, like that we are human race rather than just identifying with a certain nation. But that has already happened because that is our interaction with climate change.
That's what I thought.
Is that every individual country's response affects the whole, and we're all interacting with the whole, and everybody's choice affects that. So it is one conversation between humanity and the Earth.
Well, and also COVID is a whole nother example of where the world kind of had to be united in the whole, like, okay, we're going to close down travel. We're going to, mask up. And like, it was kind of like a worldwide thing that occurred, at least in a lot of places. Yeah, it was just kind of a blanket sort of acceptance of this is happening in Canada, US, Europe. I'm not quite sure exactly about like maybe like African countries, what they all ended up doing, because I know that in the West, we tend to just get Western news coverage. I think that was something where we all were kind of unified in mind to be like, nope, we got to stop this, and deaths are coming. It was a similar threat to climate change as well.
I think with those two examples in mind, probably if we had aliens that were easily offendable in any way, we'd just die. Because really, we haven't dealt with either COVID or climate change very well as a species.
Yeah. I think with COVID, we're at least better. But yeah.
Yeah. We're getting there, but
You
we're
know,
real
like, it's-
slow, right?
Because we did, like, there was months and months where people just stayed inside because their province told them to, their city told them to, their country told them to, and kind of the world told them to. And we just did it, which is weird.
Yeah, but like not all people did. You know what I'm saying? There was always people that were like, no, thanks.
There were a few outliers for sure. But anyways, yeah, like that is an example where, yeah, I can see us somewhat unified in that regard. But in terms of if aliens did come, who would represent us? That's tricky. Ambassador for Earth. Who's up for the job?
Seems terrifying.
Okay, so that's kind of like somewhat political in terms of like who will represent us. How do we kind of interact? I guess we'd
I think
also
when it
want
comes to who would represent us, the president of the United States, whoever that is at the time, would just assume that it's them.
Agreed.
Oh, for sure.
Absolutely.
But then also
regardless
probably,
of whether or not that's a good choice.
Yeah.
but then also probably Russia would as well. Like both of them were in the space race, right?
Well,
like they both were
yeah.
attempting to do that back in the past. So
When you think about the world powers, and then like China would definitely want to throw their hat in the ring
want some
for
claim. Yeah. Yeah. Probably end up getting the loudest, biggest countries to be the ones to represent us, which might not go over crazy well,
that. No.
but it might unify them. Because normally tensions are between those, those countries.
I
the
don't
bigger
think it would
superpowers.
unify them.
I agree.
I
I
think
don't
they would
know.
all assume that they're the greatest and that they should do it.
Yeah.
And they'd be shocked that somebody else even has the audacity to assume it would be them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What about like economic implications? Like would our currency change? Like would we become more of like a unified planet, at least when it came to currency?
I don't think so.
I think these are excellent questions, but like you need a book that gives you like the entire situation, because if the aliens are just here to like visit and say sup and then leave, like no,
Yeah.
why would anything change really?
Yeah, and the way that we interact with them would also be very dependent on, like, there's no cut and dry example of this, but I'm thinking about how the countries interact with each other. Everybody recognizes that the other country is made up of humans. Like, that's just a given. And then every country also like recognizes that within those countries there is a myriad of cultures, and we might think that a certain culture is doing something different than how we would do it, but we can't necessarily see that as wrong, even though people still judge each other for the cultural differences all the time. That's very obvious. But we understand that generally, like, the reasonable people understand that you can't just judge somebody because they have a different belief system or different values than you might see those as incorrect values, but we have to understand that they're just different values. But then if you enter a species or race of these other beings from somewhere else into the mix, even if we were to get onto a standard level of communication with them and get to understand them and get to know who they are and how they operate and how we interact with them, even the very little that we think we're able to impose over each other as human beings, like somebody does something and you're like, that's wrong. And they'd be like, oh, well, culturally, we think this way. And you'd be like, well, yeah, but if you think about how it affects another person, that's wrong. You can't use any of that, or you couldn't assume to use any of that in relation to a different otherworldly race of creatures, because they're just not humans. Like, I think that's like the biggest thing is, like, whatever preconceived notions you had about aliens, if they were Like if they were mean to you or something like that, you'd be like, well, how do you even know that that's what they're being? Like, oh, we'll retaliate, and then we'll drive them back or something like that. Well, maybe they're not. Maybe they see us as insignificant and they see us as doing things wrong, or they've been monitoring us and seeing that we can't even agree across an entire planet, and maybe they are an entire planet, or maybe they're just one country from their planet or whatever.
Ooh,
like
that's interesting.
we can't assume to use any of the values or considerations that we give each other here on Earth for them, because it means nothing, or we have to assume that it could mean nothing, I guess is what I'm trying to say, if that makes any sense.
Okay. There was a time. Imagine yourself.
Okay.
In a time where what you see is what is. There is the land. There is your home. There is your city. There are other towns out there as well. And beyond that, eventually, depending on which direction you go, you might hit more land, or you could also hit water. At this point, though, you don't really have much by ways to venture on that water. But as the years progress, and as your children eventually grow up, and their children grow up as well, you eventually develop the technology to transport onto the water for vast distances. And eventually, you decide to send someone out into the dark reaches of the water to go and see what else is out there. And so these people who you send out on their quest eventually hit other land that's beyond the water, and another group of people who they look a little different than you do. They also sound very different, and they have a totally different way of life. Now, this is where we hit, from the Western world in our history, one of the other cultures outside of Europe, right? So if we transport that kind of a mentality of there are unknowns out there, right? And eventually you might hit people who do communicate differently, but we start to realize there is common ground that we can communicate on, right? And we start to share values and maybe start to trade past diseases to each other, and all of that. I guess when I view alien contact, I view essentially what's already occurred in history, but on a macro scale, where now it's just a bigger ocean, right? And we've now hit another continent in a way. Does that maybe change how you would interact with people?
I think that initial contact would be really trippy, but then if we were to go further than that and discover more and more species or whatever entities out there, I think that with each successive one, it would become more commonplace, and just it might still be surprising or exciting or shocking or scary, but it would be less and less of a big deal with each new discovery, because now we've already tread that water once. And so with us currently in 2021, we're in a position in the world where we feel like we've discovered all the other people in the world. So like, we don't even know what it's like to have discovered that first other group of people. Like, I don't remember from school learning about how did they even have the idea of otherworldly beings back then, or is that just something that we've developed over the years as we've just developed the understanding of what it means to explore and what could be out there, and science and our knowledge of that stuff? Like, did aliens exist that far back then, or was there just not really that concern, and if you met something else that talked similar to you but you couldn't understand them, you just assumed they were other people that had just been discovered, and like that's just who they were? There was no life. Like, it obviously changed lives, it changed societies to come into contact with each other, but it wasn't like this dreaded fear that these people would consume their, well, okay, now that I'm talking about it, maybe it is. Maybe they were worried of annihilation and stuff like that. So maybe it was just in a different mindset than we are now. So I don't know.
Ashton, you have a an expression on your face. What are you thinking?
Oh, I'm just thinking in general. But I think when I think of discovering aliens, I never think of us finding them somewhere. It's always them coming here. Mostly because we, as far as I know, haven't been able to get very far. So the chances are much higher that something would find us than that we would find something else.
So, yeah. So maybe we're more the indigenous people on North America rather than the sailors setting out to sea, and that eventually we might have Europeans all of a sudden land on our shores
and completely wipe us out. Yeah, possibly.
Yeah, with disease. Yeah.
Who has better diseases? Who has bigger guns? That's the race of entities that will win.
Well, and I think that's what the fear is, right?
Yeah.
Like, we find aliens, and that's what they're going to be. They're going to be harder, better, faster, and stronger. They will be a planet of daft punks.
I hope they're not like us.
That would only be the case if, I think, at least, if the aliens would also come from the Goldilocks zone, so that our planet would not just be visible and interactable, but also inhabitable.
Explain what the Goldilocks zone is, Ashlyn, for listeners who aren't aware.
Oh, the Goldilocks zone is just not too hot, not too cold, just right. So it's a series of parameters that would allow life, and anything within those parameters is considered within the Goldilocks zone.
For where your planet sits away from its star.
There we go. Yeah.
So you're saying that the parameters that we think are required for life may not be required for alien life.
And so the aliens would only really come and interact with us if they also were from a similar planet, which would be a planet in the Goldilocks zone.
Interesting.
Do you think that would actually stop it, though? Because, I can see us donning ridiculously expensive suits and making
Space
ridiculously expensive multi-decade trips to land on a planet in which we could not possibly survive on our own because it's completely inhospitable to us. But we have found other life there, and we don't know how it exists, but we want to go and, mine it or meet it or whatever.
Yeah, I think they would visit, but they wouldn't destroy us. I don't think.
Yeah.
If this place was inhabitable.
Okay.
Unless they wanted all of our copper.
Yeah, I guess it would depend on resources too.
Yeah.
for lack of a better mineral that comes to mind.
Or buffalo, right?
Oh, we already got rid of most of those on our own.
I know. I'm just saying
Oh, no.
But what if we are the buffalo? Yum yum.
Well, yeah. I guess that would be a whole nother conversation of, are we food to the aliens?
Yeah.
Versus do we at least have a seat at the table rather than are on the table? So.
Yeah. Do we have apples in our mouths or not?
Yeah. So yeah, no, it's interesting. I don't know, the alien conversation is it's such a broad conversation. The only way that I can wrap my head around it is to make it a macro version of what's already occurred. To me, that's just I feel like that's how, looking back at history, how we've responded to exploring the unknown, or how we've responded to having the unknown come to us, that, because I think again, the problem I also have is just that I've only really been exposed to Western version of history. I don't really know what else has happened around the world, because I'm sure there's been so many other occurrences where things like this have happened before. But the only real thing that I have in my head is just when the first settlers came here, there was an aspect of where, trade was kind of involved, and you were trying to maybe talk, but then also miscommunication would occur at times, and then that would cause bloodshed, and then staking claim on land,
or just outright deception.
Yeah. So And yeah, I mean, humanity is not really the echelon of the universe, I'm sure, in terms of behavior. So I feel like we'd probably, if we found another planet, we'd probably abuse it in some way.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Definitely.
We'd be like, oh yeah, free stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
exactly what we would do.
I also like how when we think about aliens kind of among us, we tend to skew towards, well, maybe they're already here and they're observing us, or maybe they're literally living among us and they're just taking on our forms disguised as us in order to get to know us more and to study us more and observe us. And like, I mean, I guess there's always that possibility. There's like, I can't say that that's not a possibility, but think about like if we did that to anything else that we discovered. Like we discover, again, I'm going back to the ocean. We discover a new species of fish. So then rather than being like, guys, we discovered this new species of fish, look at what it can do. We're going to study it, follow it around with cameras or whatever like that. You just get like a whole bunch of guys to dress up in like giant fish suits and swim around with them for 5 years because we don't want to like let them know that we know that they're watching. And it's like what purpose would that serve? Are these aliens that find us so super advanced and intelligent that if they landed on our planet, not only could they make themselves not be seen, but they could look like us to like trick us into revealing about ourselves to them? Like we wouldn't be able to do that even if we found something on the moon. We wouldn't be able to disguise ourselves as like an asteroid and land on the moon like a bunch of space dust.
Would we care?
Yeah, like, well, we
wouldn't care to disguise ourselves.
Well, that's, yeah, and a part of that is probably our hubris, which is probably what would assume that the aliens would come to us because Earth is the center of the universe.
Yes.
But you know, and so maybe that's our downfall. Maybe that's why we can't get all the nations together to unite under a common cause in the first place. Like,
on the other hand, along that train of thought, when we do find a fish in the sea that is new, we do observe it. And the fish may know that we're there sometimes, but lots of times they don't know or don't like register because they are just a fish.
So we have stuff possibly observing us, but we don't know or register because we're just people and we're not, you know.
Yeah.
We're not one of those.
We're just not that smart yet.
Not one of those formless aliens that Star Trek always uses, right? In the original series.
Yeah.
But there's all sorts of weird phenomena, right? What else are eclipses than just the ship passing before the sun as it observes us?
Probably the moon?
No. It uses the moon as a disguise. The moon really is the ship.
Oh.
That's way too close for comfort.
The man in the moon? It's literally a man in the moon, but it's like an alien.
We still haven't been able to explain Bigfoot either, so.
I mean, what if the moon itself is just an alien?
Yeah.
The moon is like, I have disguised myself as a moon to observe you. And also I'm going to screw with your oceans a little bit.
There we go. It's a big moon conspiracy. We figured it out, guys.
We've cracked the code.
That's what we do. That's our job.
Yep. It's a pretty broad topic, and there's so many different angles at which you could explore it by. But I mean, aliens they're interesting. I think if they do come, it'll have implications for us quite a bit when it comes to like language. Could be our currency, our theology. You know, so there's tons of different ways that you can kind of explore this. But we don't necessarily need to dig into them all.
I want to mention one more podcast that I listened to. It's called The Truth, and it's a bunch of short fictional stories, and they have one called They're Made of Meat. And in this short story, it's basically two aliens having like a debrief call in which one of the aliens has come to Earth and like observed, and the other alien is like on the other side of the universe or something taking this debrief call, and the guy who's been on Earth is like, well, it's really odd because they're made of meat. And the other one's like, what? Like, what do you mean? That's disgusting. What do you mean they're made of meat? He's like, they're made of meat. They are thinking, moving meat sacks. Like that is what they are. It is disgusting. And like they have this long conversation, and then in the end they of the debrief, they're like, so I think we can both decide that this one probably shouldn't go in the official record. Earth just doesn't exist. And he's like, yeah, this place is super creepy. They're made of meat.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah. That's pretty great. Yeah, that was one of the theories I know of like, if there are aliens, why we haven't seen them is that like we're like the trashy part of the universe that nobody wants to deal with at all, right?
Yeah.
So, and hence why they don't care about us, because they're like, just bypass that, skip that quadrant, and yeah. We leave them alone, they leave us alone. So yeah. Well, there we go. That is our little discussion on aliens. I'm sure there's much more to explore. If we ever want to do a second podcast, maybe we can pick one of the many tangents that we can go on and do that. But at least that's kind of a bit of a brief look. So thanks for listening. You can reach us at our anchor.fm page. Feel free to drop us a video or an audio message at anchor.fm/housebound. And you can also reach us out at this
is going well.
I am being controlled by aliens right now. They don't know normal patterns speech human nature.
You should let Ashlyn do it.
Yikes, man. Yikes.
We didn't give you any numbers, so ET cannot phone home, but you can for sure email at us at thehouseboundpodcast@gmail.com.
Nice. There we go. And feel free to listen to us on Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever, essentially like wherever Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. We are there, including you who are listening to us from outer space.
Oh, dear.
If we're the podcast they choose, they're the trashy ones.
That's true.
Oh, dear.
Do we or do we not think that it would be a good idea to find an unused frequency in which we can blast episodes of our podcast into space?
Oh, there we go.
24/7, 365.
There we go.
Oh, boy. Perfect.
I think you at least get a sample size of what life is like, at least from a North American perspective.
Yeah.
We've covered a wide variety of topics.
A very small sample size. Yeah.
Things that might be aliens. Blobfish, Herbie, Greg Reimer.